Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. I am your host and guide, Mr. Crispy, speaking to you through uncanny frequencies and sharing with you stories strange, fascinating, and terrifying. The views and opinions expressed on air are solely those of the speaker. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour is an entertainment program, and any similarities to any person living or dead, or any place or events, are entirely coincidental. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour was created except as indicated by Matt Henshaw. Listener discretion is advised. And now, take Mr. Crispy's moldering hand in yours, ignore that tacky fluid under my nails, and join me for the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. And now for my next trick. Andy read the instructions again. He had bought the book Magic and You at secondhand books and such a few weeks back. He was desperate for new tricks to drum up some business. The rent was due in a couple weeks, and he needed something spectacular to attract attention to his fledgling child birthday party magic business. It had been a few months since he was laid off, and jobs being hard to come by, Andy decided to fall back on his first love of performing magic. The cracked tome he now held in his hands seemed decades old, and some of the exhortations he was directed to perform seemed to be a combination of Oriental and Middle Eastern sounds, hard for his American mouth to make sense of. He silently repeated them to himself as he dug out an ill-fitting black suit from his closet. On the shelf was a dusty cylindrical box containing a black top hat with a red ribbon around the brim. He then fashioned himself a black cape out of one of his moth-eaten bed sheets, and with a glitter pen wrote in large cursive letters, "The Amazing Andy" on the back. He went to his bathroom to shave, not noticing the subtle shifting of the hat on the table. Barry was one of Andy's old co-workers whose daughter Carol was turning 7, and she loved magic. Barry felt bad for Andy when he got laid off, and agreed to pay him $50 to perform at Carol's birthday party. Andy arrived in his 2009 Honda Civic, which shuddered to a stop on the street as he parked. Andy looked at himself in the rearview mirror, a heavy sigh as he thought, "This is what it has come to." In his back seat, among the empty big gulps and chip bags, was a duffel bag that contained his retinue of illusions and tricks. Barry had told him a few days earlier that Carol loved rabbits, so he picked one up from a local pet store. The rabbit was a little jittery, understandable given all the noise his car made. A few more of these gigs and he could maybe afford the repairs it so desperately needed. He got out, grabbing the bag, and made his way up the drive, top hat at a jaunty angle, as he recited the magic words to himself. Barry came up to him and shook his hand. "It'll be another 30 for the rabbit, and you'll let Carol have it, right?" Andy asked. He really didn't want to take care of the money. "Sure, man," Barry added. "So $80? Good luck, they're all in the backyard speeding on sugar." Andy was less than amazing. The initial cheers from the children assembled soon gave way to bored looks and agitated shifting in chairs. Andy's top hat grew hot on his head, and he tripped more than once on his too long pants, which one of the nastier boys guffawed at. The tricks also were not received well. When extracting a coin from Tommy's ear, $3 and change fell out of the sleeve of Andy's coat. As Andy tapped the wand on a deck of cards, presumably to reveal the card little Sue had chosen, the card he had hidden in his grip fell to the ground, eliciting a disappointed groan from the congregation. Andy looked at his watch. Only 10 minutes had gone by. Barry looked embarrassed and wouldn't meet their eyes. This wasn't going well. It was time for him to pull out the showstopper, the one with the rabbit, which he had hidden under his magic lectern. "And now for my next trick," Andy stammered, I shall produce a bunny out of my hat. He removed the hat, his bangs falling wet against his sweaty forehead. He displayed the hat to the children, inviting Carol to look inside. No rabbit, right, Carol? Andy asked. No bunny rabbit, said Carol, who was also less than impressed with the show thus far. Okay, well, let me set it on my magic table here and say the magic words, Andy said, setting the hat down with a flourish as he depressed the secret button which would allow easy access to the bunny when he picked the hat back up. He intoned the lines from the book and lifted the hat so he could put the rabbit in. No rabbit, damn it. Andy blushed and put the hat back down. He repeated the words, and as he did, he saw the duffel bag shift. What happened next was indeed a hell of a trick, but not the trick Andy intended. Emerging from within the duffel bag impossibly, a giant brown paw emerged, easily 6 feet wide. The fur stank of pink thinner and something biological. It rose and smashed down on Carol, reducing her to a flat and gory smear of skin, bone, and blood. The children and parents screamed as Andy stood frozen in shock and horror as the thing continued to emerge. Glistening skin stretched taut over 5 legs, terminating in the giant deadly paws. At their centers were hooked suckers which scraped up the lawn. The insectile legs all met in a spherical thorax, coruscated with black scales that steamed. The thorax was covered on the underside with dozens of small purple nipples which dripped a cloudy fluid, causing the lawn to shrivel and blacken where it fell. There was an ungodly screech as the head emerged, 8 compound eyes blinking and rolling. Its maw resembled that of a cockroach, but with a jutting proboscis terminating in something not unlike lobster claws. This horror was more than Andy could take, and he fell unconscious to the ground. As the creature stood, taller than Barry's house, clouds in the sky went from white to orange, and the color of the sky went black. The beast hooked the unconscious body of the amazing Andy on one of its suckers, piercing him right through. In one bite of its hideous mouth, he made Andy disappear as it stalked more prey. And now from old Wyethscope's quarterly concern, the meteorological forecast. An unexpected cold front is due to pass through the region, dropping temperatures 30 to 40 degrees below normal. Livestock may spontaneously enter hibernation due to confusion. Do not attempt to revive them from this state. Dress appropriately to prevent frostbite. You've been warned. In spite of cold air temperatures, there will mercifully be little in the way of precipitation. The fat old cosmic star will seem to swell and become ochre in color. Solar flares are likely, so attendant disruptions along telegraph lines, including spontaneous combustion of same, are likely. Staring directly into the sun may result in blindness, but also may result in second sight in matters of personal love. Exercise caution in sharing reports of prognostication. At the Polrash Retirement Home, the Yeater triplets, Janet, Betsy, and Robin, have automatically woven potholders indicating a cyclone to hit Munt County between June 12th and 14th. Residents are advised to seek shelter in case of storm conditions. Curiously, Betsy's potholder includes a creature towering over Bramble Dam, breathing fire. Stay tuned to local radio reports for more information on this and other developments. We now bring you sage advice and fortunes based on your zodiacal sign. Taurus. Avoid at all costs business dealings with Pisces. Failure to do so will result in total financial ruin and a curse spanning 3 generations. Lucky numbers 8, 17, 57. Gemini. A crackling underfoot results in a rush of magma which will sweep your bones away. When cooled, ants and cockroaches will feed upon you and build mounds of their excrement. They take the form of your screaming face. A cult forms in worship of your effigy. Lucky numbers 8, 440, 2. Libra. Your latent abilities of extrasensory perception bloom into mighty and terrible skill. The creatures of the sea do your bidding. Leviathan rises. Lucky numbers 5, 8, 9. Aquarius. Watch for signs of flame and fire. If a tree be struck down by lightning, this is a beneficent sign indeed. The work is ready to begin. Lucky numbers 23, 5, 90. Pisces. Your mind will be struck by an aneurysm, resulting in a loss of speech. To compensate, your non-dominant hand will begin to draw semaphoric representations of things to come in the next 18 months. Save these and make a killing in independent publishing. Congratulations, Nostradamus. Lucky numbers 3, 1/3, 56. We now have a feature spotlighting less commonly known congregations for the spiritually seeking and curious. We go behind the altar with the cult of Milthrus. The entrance to the temple is humble, flanked by 2 flickering torches. Scrawled on a piece of old driftwood, Milthrus, the only indication of the ceremony to be held within. A footpath leads to stone stairs, worn down from years of use. Steps echo as one descends into the vestibule. An intoxicating smoke lightly hangs in the air. The Syndexicants bare their feet in respect to the hallowed god they are about to worship. A wooden door creaks open on aged hinges, and an usher beckons them to enter. Here, 2 long tables that seat 12 apiece, upon which are wooden bowls and utensils. 2 women, veiled and wearing layers of diaphanous purple robes, stand near portals which lead to an unseen area where the feast is being prepared. The Syndexicants seat themselves, facing a raised altar not unlike a stage. The warped wood of the stage creaks, and, illuminated by 24 guttering candles, a nude older man shuffles out. The congregation hums in varied tones that are slightly dissonant and trembling. The nude older man is wearing an old leopard skull on his head, a veil of its skin suspended across the fangs, whose tips end almost on his cheek. A dead snake is wrapped over his left shoulder, and he carries a burlap sack, stained brown and dripping, in his right. He makes his way to an illuminated circle and places the sack on the stage. In a tremulous voice, in an ancient tongue, the older man invokes, "Milthrus, Lord of Faces, come before us and join in our feast." The congregation responds, "Come to us, Milthrus, show us thy holy visage." The older man stoops and begins to pull out of the sack a heap of hemp twine, bones, and graying meat. Milthrus beseeches these Syndexicants to provide him a face that he may be recognized. As if in a trance, one of the congregants, a thin man, rises and says, "My face for my lord," and ascends the 3 steps up to the altar stage. As the thin man approaches the old man, the usher walks up carrying a sharp jeweled dagger and a smoking chalice. "Drink, Syndexicant of the sacred root, and prepare for thy sacrifice." The thin man sips from the cup, while the old man tests the blade against his palm, drawing a thin wound that fills with blood. The thin man sits on the floor, eyes toward the domed ceiling, and the old man solemnly says, "With this gift thy strings be cut." He pushes the dagger under the thin man's chin. While the Syndexicants chant their invocation, the old man slices up under the thin man's jawline. Red flows down his neck. The old man expertly continues his sacred surgery over the thin man's ear, up to the crown of his head, then in symmetry back down the other side of the thin man's face to where he began the cutting. He has done this countless times according to how he was taught. The thin man is crying and rocking a little, but is still conscious and making supplicating sounds. The old man hands the dagger back to the usher, who steps back into the shadows. As the thin man trembles, The old man takes his yellowed fingers to the top of the thin man's scalp and deliberately massages his nails under the flap of skin. Slowly he works the skin free. Years of performing this ritual ensures the flesh stays in a continuous piece as he works down the face. Blood is now coursing down the front of the thin man's robes, but he remains fixed in the same spot, paralyzed by the elixir he drank. With a wet tearing, the old man pulls the rest of the thin man's face flesh off. The Syndexicans speak in one voice. Milthrus revealed, hail Milthrus. The old man carries the face to the pile of detritus from his sack and arranges it on the larger of two fastened white stones. He lifts the pile by the hemp twine, and it is revealed that what appeared to be a chaotic pile is in fact a marionette, now wearing on its white stone skull the face of the Syndexicant, whose ecstatic eyes in his raw meat face are still cast upward in reverie. As the marionette rises, so too does the entire room of Syndexicants. As the old man moves the string, the puppet and Syndexicants make identical motions of ritual. We wear faces that nature hath given us, but our true faces are reflections of thy holy face, Milthrus, for in thy image we are reflections, the old man says, his gnarled hands making the puppet dance. Hail Milthrus, the Syndexicants reply, moving their arms and swaying their bodies as the puppet does. We give thanks for the strings, invisible to our eyes, that tie your will to our actions. Hail Milthrus, says the old man. Hail Milthrus, the Syndexicants respond. We now prepare to feast in thy honor. Praise Milthrus. The old man finishes with a flourish, seating the marionette on the stage in the same position as the paralyzed thin man, stretching out the puppet's right arm. The thin man's right arm also extends. Come, brothers, baptize thyselves and affirm your oath to Milthrus, and then we shall feast, the old man says, taking a stone flute from the usher. The Syndexicants rise as one and walk to the stage as the old man plays a discordant tune. They approach the thin man and lightly dab their fingers against his wet forehead, then grasp his right forearm, raising the fourth finger in the air, as is the custom. They murmur reverently, I pledge an oath to heed the pull of thy will. Hail Milthrus. They then repeat this with the puppet, the moldering meat of its arm yielding to the grip, the thin man's face on the stone skull becoming more gore-covered. The Syndexicants then sit, while the women bring out clay pots steaming with a gray gruel, which is deposited in the bowls. The old man makes a sign while continuing the lilting tune, and the Syndexicants begin to eat, their mastication providing a strange rhythm to the tune that gradually decays. The marionette, of its own accord, rises, as does the thin man, who sits beside the old man. The old man gently removes the tachydermis from the puppet's stone head, which promptly collapses back into a festering heap. The usher brings a rusty steel needle and hemp thread to the old man, who cheerfully works at sewing the thin man's face back on. When his work is done, they exchange the customary grip and join their brethren at the feasting table. A stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet. Today, meet lawman Horace Festerton, born 1892, died 1954. Horace Festerton, known to his colleagues as Uncle Horry, was born on a homestead to parents King and Jane in 1892 outside of Nickel. Jane died in childbirth, her undercarriage split by the 20-pound frame of Horace. At the age of 10, young Horace had already reached a weight of 200 pounds, with no sign of stopping. Feeding Horace's voracious appetite became a true community affair, with half a dozen meals delivered daily to the widower Festerton. As a teenager, Horace became enamored with the profession of fighting crime, and set his studies on becoming a constable of Nickel. After completing his schooling and now weighing 600 pounds, an estimate as scales at that time could not accurately measure his real weight, Horace took and passed examinations certifying him as able to pursue employment with the Nickel Constabulary and Peacekeeping Corps. An entrance to the building had to be resized to accommodate the hefty young man. There was no doubt Horace was right for the job, as he nearly immediately prevented a robbery from the Nickel Savings and Loan Bank, earning the respect of the town. On his beat, often performed in a wagon drawn by 4 mules, Officer Festerton was affable and was known to give sweets to children. His weight prevented him from serving the nation in the Great War, which was a source of pain for Horace. Try as he might, though, his waist continued to expand, even after efforts to lose weight. It was during the late 1910s when he would meet his betrothed, Sally Farrow, a woman 4 years his junior. They were wed in a private service at the Festerton homestead, and a plot was gifted them as a family gift by King and his new companion, Anna. In the 1920s, Sally would go on to bear 4 children, 1 dying in childbirth, 2 conjoined at the shoulder. Peter and George, the conjoined twins, were a struggle to care for, but managed to live well into their 50s. The surviving daughter, Pearl, was known to possess uncanny powers of the mind. As his family grew, Horace continued to work and move up the ranks, becoming lead constable in 1927. When the governor established the Leeds Initiative in 1935 as a way to utilize eminent domain to seize land for public projects, Horace proved to be one of the more effective arms of the law, due in no small part to his imposing weight and gregarious nature. In 1940, Horace became enamored with all things radioactive. He read journals about nascent projects on nuclear bombs and collected radon clocks and thermometers, which he stored in a shed known to Nickel residents as the Glowing House, for its eerie and strange green-yellow light, which could be seen from a mile away. During the 1940s, no doubt due to his exposure to the radiation, his weight began to first gradually, then more precipitously drop, down to 300 pounds by 1946 and 200 pounds by 1947. His wife Sally passed due to complications from consumption in 1949. It was then that the forlorn Horace retired from public service, spending increasingly more time in the Glowing House and refusing visitors. In 1954, after several weeks of food deliveries standing untouched at the porch of the homestead rotting in the spring sun, Corps men found the body of Horace in the Glowing House, thin as a rail and skin a greenish hue. It is speculated that he succumbed to cancer, and his hands and feet were covered with split black canker sores, and his nose had the appearance of a snake's head. The peaceful night was broken by the simian howls and hacking of Archduke Aperitov reviewing his leisure. And now, Fiction Corner. It was the 3rd shot that made Wendy start to feel inebriated. 4 weeks into her fall semester, and having worked damn hard at her mostly upper-level coursework, she felt entitled to a break with her friend Anne at her apartment. Anne lived about a 20-minute walk from where Wendy lived on the other end of campus. They had been visiting and gossiping for the last 3 hours, listening to the college radio station and slowly getting their buzz on. Fridays, unfortunately, started early for Wendy, with her history lecture starting at 8:15 a.m. It was now 10 p.m., and she had downed shot number 6 about 35 minutes ago. Giggling, Wendy slurred, "Anne, I'm so tired. Can I just crash here for a couple hours before I go home? You know I have Greg coming over after the football game, and I think you don't want to be around for that." Anne gave a mischievous grin. Ah, yes, Wendy thought. Anne and Greg had met about a year ago, and Wendy would always hear on Saturday afternoons about their Friday late-night trysts. "Just let me close my eyes for like 15 minutes, Wendy whined. "Fine," Anne grinned. "I'm going to go outside for a smoke, then you need to get out and head back to your place." Wendy said, "All right," and laid on the futon, covering her head with a pillow. Wendy awoke to the sound of a door closing in the apartment. All the lights were out. "Anne, are you there?" she said. There was no answer. As she sat up, she felt a little of the alcoholic vertigo, and waited a moment before getting to her feet. "Where are you, Anne?" she called out, but still no answer. She went to the front door. It was locked. She must have gone out to meet Greg for a drink. She figured she needed to get back to her place, so she got her jacket and left the apartment, ensuring it was locked behind her. As she started down the sidewalk that led to campus, she noticed that the streets were less illuminated than usual, creating odd shadows on the paths that she had become so familiar with over the last few years. She noticed that the trees looked at once thinner, but also not in their usual places. She shook her head at the seeming incongruities, blaming her somewhat drunken state. She stumbled over areas of the walkway that were higher than she remembered, almost collapsing a couple of times into a heap. She really should cut herself off at 4 the next time, she thought to herself. All along the main mall of the campus, the most straightforward way for her to get back to her apartment, there were occasionally telephones in yellow boxes fastened on tall gray concrete spires with lights that arched over, casting round, pale yellow circles on the cobblestone. Screwed into the tops of the yellow telephone boxes were blue light bulbs. These were connected to the security desk of the university. Wendy weaved her way from spire to spire, and as she did, she found her disorientation growing. Shadows fell in unexpected spinning patterns, making a maze Wendy got quickly lost in. A wave of nausea, and she fell to her knees. She sobbed a little and made her way to the nearest phone. Maybe she could reach someone who could give her a little support and direction home. The spire was covered in all manner of signs. Here one read,
"Lost cat, answers to Baxter. Contact Melanie at 235-4876 if found."
Wendy frowned. Poor little kitty. She stood and opened the phone box. Inside, a plain index card said, "Are you lost? Contact security. Dial 7. She lifted the plastic handle of the phone. Underneath was a dial with 5 digits on it. 24670. She extended her finger into the dial and immediately yowled in disgust. Her finger came away with a brown, sticky residue on it. She hastily backed away from the box, the door of it hanging ajar. The shadows were moving again now. Wendy was quite agitated and ran to another of the spires. An identical box, but this one with the blue light flickering arrhythmically. She opened this door, and another card read,
"Feeling lost? Contact security. Dial 7.
This dial had the traditional 10 digits, 0 through 9, and she looked before placing her finger in the 7 slot. She spun the dial and she held the receiver to her ear. One spastic pulse, another, then a tired-sounding male voice. "Security, how can I help?" "Yes, Wendy stammered. She was embarrassed that she was lost on a campus she knew. "I need some help finding my way to my apartment. I'm by, Stantz Science Hall." She confirmed that modern-looking building she was closest to. "I'm at phone number B2, she read on the placard under the flickering blue light. "Okay, ma'am, someone will be there shortly to help." And then he disconnected. Wendy tapped on the phone plum a couple of times. Lost the connection. Damn. She waited a minute, then 5, then 15. She lost track of time. The shadows continued to drift. Combined with her bouts of vertigo, she became more disoriented. She felt unsafe standing under the flickering blue light, the wind picking up. Black clouds moved against a slightly less dark sky. She was concerned, and that worry began to give her a false sense of sobriety. She had to move. She began walking towards the hall, and then the shadows shifted again. Vertigo hit her and she stepped into a void, losing contact with the ground. She yelped and skittered back onto the concrete. When her vision came correct, the hall was gone. Now there were only a row of trees. She turned around, trees there too. But to her right, another spire, another yellow box, another blue light. She walked as quickly as her shaking legs could manage. The spires seemed to recede every 6 steps she took toward it. Nausea made her stop, bend over and heave onto the pavement. Nothing came up. The trees still standing in a column closing in, closer to her. Wendy wending her way closer to the box, the trees almost a foot from her. She made it to the box, her breath coming quick, her heart beating in her chest. She opened the box and grabbed the phone. This dial had 7 digits and a piece of cardboard taped to the receiver. "Lost Act 7-4. She shook her head. Trembling fingers traced along the dial. As she turned the wheel, it sickeningly spiraled into the phone unit. She held the receiver to her ear. A click, then two, then silence, then a tone, and 3 more clicks. A rough voice said, "What is it?" "Help!" Wendy cried. "I'm lost. I don't know where I am." She looked around, more trees impossibly crowding into the pale circle of light. "Where are you, Loke?" the voice said. Then it cut out. Another lost connection. She took the phone away from her ear. A high-pitched squeal emitted from the speaker, and then a chittering voice in static, sexless intoned,
"Prefernal algae project into the communicant. All black go to sleep."
The last word making Wendy's eyes go wide in shock at its intensity and hysterics. The phone's handle began to burn into her hand as though on fire. She looked down at her hand, now her arm, scabbing, blistering with iridescent green waves. She couldn't breathe. She stepped back 1 step, 2, into the trees, branches raking at her back. She squealed in pain and ran in the other direction, into more trees. These had branches with thorns that raked against her face. Blood and tears spilling down her cheeks, she ran and fell, falling, losing contact with the ground, occasionally hitting a branch. Falling for what felt like seconds, looking up, she saw the spire grow above her, blue light flashing now a dot against the pale orange glow of the light. Then something not a branch, a membranous object fluttered against her face. A wing, but no, this had other textures too. It fluttered again, covering her nose, a yellow talon scraping against her own fluttering eyelid, scratching it, searing pain, and a smell now of almonds soaked in kerosene. A taste in her mouth like cotton rancid with old blood. The wind rushing by her ears, simultaneously popping them while shrieking with something like a tortured cackle. A tone, the tone from the phone, rising in volume until it became material, a cudgel that bludgeoned her back hard enough to enter her, run up her spine, into the base of her skull where it shook her. The burning now a flat surface upon which she splayed, thrashing and convulsing. Anne and Greg woke up around 10 a.m. on Saturday morning. They went to the Union to get some coffee and pastries. As they walked in, they saw the flyer that had been up for a couple of months now. "So sad they haven't found her yet," Anne said. "Yeah," Greg replied. "She's been gone for a while now, since last semester." "I'd hate to be her roommate, wondering when she'll be back," Anne said, sighing, as they walked in the building. The sign read,
Lost. Wendy Crowther, age 20. Last seen April 2. Wearing brown sweater, blue jeans. Contact security or police with any information.
Fear by Guy de Maupassant. We went on deck after dinner. There was not a ripple on the whole Mediterranean, whose smooth surface shone like silver under the great moon. The big steamer glided along, throwing up a curling column of thick black smoke toward the starlit sky. And in our wake, the white water was churned up by the screw and the rapid movement of the huge ship, foaming and twisted, gleaming with phosphorus as though it were nothing but bubbling moonlight. Our party consisted of 6 or 8 men, all of which were gazing admiringly and in rapt silence at the distant shores of Africa, whither we were bound. The captain, who was smoking an after-dinner cigar with us, suddenly took up the conversation where it had been left off during dinner. "Yes," he said, "that day I was badly frightened. My ship stayed up on the rocks 6 hours beaten by the sea. Luckily we were picked up toward evening by an English collier that saw our plight." Then a tall man with sunburned face and dignified bearing, one of those men who have been in strange lands and have braved terrible dangers, and whose eyes seem to have retained in their depths something of the fantastic sights they have seen, spoke for the first time. "Captain, you say that you were frightened. I do not believe it. You use a wrong word, and the sensation you felt was not that of fear. An energetic man never feels afraid before actual danger. He may be anxious, he may be restless, but fear is something entirely different. Laughingly, the captain replied, "Well, by Jove, I can tell you I was frightened." Then the man with the sunburned face said in a slow voice, "Allow me to explain my meaning. Fear, and the bravest men can experience it, is sometimes terrible, a dreadful sensation. It can be compared to the decomposition of the soil, and it is a frightful spasm of the heart and mind, the mere recollection of which sends shudders through our frame. But if a man is courageous, that never happens in the face of certain death, nor in the face of any known form of peril. It only occurs in certain abnormal instances, when a person is laboring under some strange influence, or when in the face of vague and unknowable dangers. Real fear is like a reminiscence of the fantastic terrors of past ages. A man who believes in ghosts and who imagines that he sees one must experience the sensation of fear in all its atrocious horror. As for myself, I got an idea of what it must be like in broad daylight about 10 years ago, and I experienced the full sensation of it last winter during a night in December. I've taken many chances in my life and have had any number of adventures that were desperate enough. I've had many duels. I've been attacked and almost beaten to death by robbers. Once in America I was sentenced to be hanged as a rebel, while another time I was thrown overboard by mutineers off the Chinese coast. Each time I thought that my last hour had come, and I made up my mind quickly to face the inevitable. I scarcely felt any emotion or regret. But fear is something very different. I've had a presentiment of it in Africa. Although it is the offspring of the north, the sun makes it vanish like mist. You know, gentlemen, that the Orientals place little value on life. If one of them has to die, he makes up his mind at once. Their nights are as free and void of legends as their souls are void of the morbid anxieties that haunt the brains of northern men. A panic may occur in the East, but fear is unknown there. Well, this is what happened to me in that weird country of Africa. I was crossing the downs that lie to the south of Urargla. It is one of the strangest places in the world. Of course, you all know the smooth, flat sand of ocean beaches. Well, just imagine the ocean changed into sand during a hurricane. Imagine a silent storm with motionless waves of yellow dust, as high as mountains, as irregular, varying, and tumultuous as real breakers, but larger and streaked like watered silk. The blazing southern sun sheds its full glare on this raging but silent and motionless sea. You have to climb up one side of these golden waves and slide down the other, without respite or protection or any kind from the sun. The horses groan and sink to their knees in the soft sand and slide down the other side of these astounding hills. Our little party consisted of a friend and myself, with an escort of 8 spals and 4 camels, with their keepers. We spoke not a word, for we were well nigh exhausted, and our parched throats were as dry as the desert that stretched in front of us. Suddenly one of the men gave out a sort of startled cry. We all stopped and remained motionless in our saddles from sheer amazement at a startling and unaccountable phenomenon known to all travelers in those wild regions. From somewhere in the immediate vicinity, we were unable to determine the exact location, came the sound of a beating drum, the mysterious drum of the Downs. The sound was perfectly distinct. Sometimes it would increase or decrease in volume, and then it would stop altogether, only to begin again after a little while. The Arabs, scared to death, exchanged terrified glances. One of them uttered in his own tongue, "Death is upon us!" And all of a sudden my friend, who was as dear as a brother to me, toppled from his horse, stricken with sunstroke. And during the 2 mortal hours in which I tried everything I knew to save him, that drum filled my ears with its strange, monotonous, intermittent beatings. And I felt fear, genuine, horrible fear, creep over me at the sight of the corpse of my beloved friend in that dreadful African hole, scorched by the sun and enclosed by 4 sand hills, and where, at a distance of at least 500 miles from any French village, The echo brought us the sound of a rapidly beating drum. That day I realized what it was to feel fear. The captain interrupted the speaker to inquire, "Excuse me, sir, but what was the drum after all?" The traveler resumed, "I really cannot tell you. Nobody knows. Officers who have often heard this sound attribute it to multiplied and magnified echo of sheets of sand hurled by the wind against clumps of dry grass, for it has been noticed that the phenomenon always takes place in the neighborhood of small plants that the heat of the sun has rendered as dry as parchment. According to that, the drum would only be a sort of sound mirage, but I only learned that later. Now I will relate my second experience. It was last winter and I was in a forest in the northeastern part of France. Night came 2 hours before its time, so dark was the sky. My guide was a peasant who walked alongside me in the narrow path under a dome of pine trees that shook and groaned under the furious wind. Between the treetops I could see the clouds hurrying past like a scattered army, and they looked as if they were fleeing from some unknown horror. At times, under a dreadful gale of wind, the whole forest would bend in one direction and utter a moan of distress. In spite of my heavy clothing and rapid motion, the cold was beginning to penetrate me to the marrow. We were put up overnight in a forester's home, and we were rapidly approaching the cottage. I had planned to spend a few days in the forest for the shooting. From time to time the guide would raise his eyes and mutter, "Bad weather, this." Then he spoke to me of the people who were to be our hosts. The old man had killed a poacher 2 years ago, and since then he had grown morose, as if he was haunted by the recollection of his deed. His 2 married sons lived with him. The darkness was terrible. I could not distinguish a thing, and the sighing trees filled the night with incessant rumors. At last I saw a light, and after a little while my companion knocked on the door. Several shrill women's cries answered from within. Then a tremulous man's voice demanded, "Who goes there?" My guide gave his name. We were admitted, and I was confronted by a scene I shall never forget. An old white-haired man with staring eyes was standing in the middle of the kitchen, his fingers closed in a convulsive clasp around a loaded rifle, while 2 sturdy young men with axes were guarding the door. 2 women, their faces buried in their hands, were crouching in a dark corner of the room. When we explained that we wished to remain overnight, the old man stood the rifle against the wall and ordered the women to prepare our sleeping quarters. But, as they made no move to carry out his command, he turned to me abruptly and said, "You see, sir, I killed a man 2 years ago this very night. Last year he came back and called me, and I expect him tonight." Then, in a voice that made me smile, he added, "We don't feel very comfortable, you understand." I reassured him as best I could, although in my heart I was glad to have come that very night, so that I might witness the manifestation of that superstitious terror. I told stories and succeeded in quieting almost everyone present. Near the hearth an old and half-blind dog was dozing with his nose between his paws. He looked for all the world like some people I've seen. Outside the storm was raging with great violence, and the little house shook under the furious wind. Through a narrow window set near the door, I could see the trees sway and the lightning flashed through the black clouds. In spite of my efforts to cheer them, I could feel that these people experienced a mysterious dread. Each time I ceased talking, they would strain their ears to catch any unwanted sound. Tired of witnessing such stupid fears, I was about to ask to be shown to my bed, when suddenly the old forester leaped to his feet, rushed for his gun, and shouted wildly, "There he is now! I can hear him!" The women fell on their knees and hid their faces, and the 2 sons clutched their axes. I was going to try to quiet them once more when, all at once, the sleeping dog awoke. He lifted his head, looked at the fire with his dim eyes, and let out one of those mournful howls that so often startle travelers in the country at night. We all watched him. He arose and stood perfectly still on his 4 paws, as if haunted by some vision, and then he directed another howl at something invisible to us, unknown, but which must have been ghastly to look upon, for he bristled from end to end. The old man, turning as white as a sheet, yelled, "He smells him! He smells him! He was with me when I killed him!" And both women, crazed with fear, began to moan in accompaniment to the dog. In spite of myself, a shudder ran down my spine. The vision that the animal saw at that time and place, and among those terrified people, was horrible beyond description. For 1 whole hour the dog howled without moving. He howled as if in the throes of a nightmare, and fear, horrible stealthy fear, was slowly taking possession of me. Fear of what? How can I tell? It was fear, and that's all I know. We remained motionless and terror-stricken, with strained ears, throbbing hearts, and trembling limbs, momentarily expecting some dreadful thing to happen. The dog began to wander around the room, sniffing the walls. He was driving us mad. All of a sudden, the peasant who acted as my guide jumped up in a sort of paroxysm of frenzied terror, seized the animal by the throat, opened a little door leading to the yard, and hurled it into the darkness outside. The dog stopped howling at once, and we remained in a dead silence that was more terrifying than the noise. Suddenly we all gave a start. Some creature was creeping along the outer wall, going in the direction of the woods. It passed the door and seemed to feel it with a hesitating hand. For 2 minutes, which almost made lunatics of us, we heard no sound. Then the creeping creature returned and scratched slightly on the door as a child might do with its nail. And then, all of a sudden, a head appeared at the window. It was a white head, and it had flaming eyes like a wild beast. And a murmur came from its lips, an indistinct sound that resembled a plaintive moan. A minute afterwards, a terrific explosion shook the kitchen. The old forester had shot at the thing. Quick as a flash, the 2 sons rushed to the window and barricaded it with a massive kitchen table and sideboard. And I swear to you that shot, which was so absolutely unexpected, froze my blood in my veins and made me feel as if I were going to give up the ghost. We stayed in the kitchen until daybreak, for we were powerless to move or utter a sound, so completely unnerved were we. We did not dare open the door till a narrow ray of light pierced through the shutters. At the foot of the wall, near the door, lay the old dog, his jaw broken by a bullet. He had got out of the yard by digging a hole under the fence. The man with the sunburned face paused, and then he added, "That night I ran no danger whatever, but I would rather live over all the real perils I have faced and go through another minute like the one I passed when the old keeper shot at the bearded head peering through the cottage window." And now from old Wyethscope's quarterly concern, In the Fields, being a source of knowledge regarding crops, livestock, and other agricultural topics. Harvest tips. It's that time of year again to think about harvesting. Here are some tips and tricks to maximize your harvest. Wake up earlier. Do not rely on the lazy cock to call you to wake. Instead, invest in an alarm clock to do the waking for you. Mechanical means of waking, independent of the solar and natural cycles, can be difficult to adjust to, but eventually you will be mechanized just like those bespoke clockwork gears. Cook up that pesky rooster because it truly serves no other practical purpose to you any longer. Joy in toil. Toil is joy. Farmers live a simple life, often gazing out at their fields for hours at a time, lost in the trance of seeing their hard work coming to literal fruition. There are some who find comfort in this peace, but not you. For the peace is pregnant with bubbling thoughts of madness brewing in your soft pink brains. So to be successful you must work. From the moment your eyes open to the moment they close from exhaustion, the fire that burns inside you should be toil. It is the only meaningful thing left, the work. If your spouse should complain about neglect, glower and mumble that there is something you need to do outside, because all other people do is take advantage of your work, your toil, turning those crops into stinking sewers full of excrement. The only joy then is in the toil. New fertilizer. One harvest ends, but your compulsion to work has you thinking of the harvest to come. And will it be better? Of course, judgments of better or worse have no meaning to your dull, drab life. But still, what to do about making your soil work better for you? The writers here at Old Wyethscope have an idea. Simply get up even earlier and pay a visit to the local coroner. Ask for Bruce, and he should be able to provide some fertilizer material from a recently deceased homeless person or an invalid that passed from the local sanitarium. Bruce is discreet and only asks for a little alone time with the corpse before passing it along to you. For a moment in the next harvest season, you'll note interesting developments in your field. And now, dates of import. June 21st, Night of 1,000 Tears, 1497 CE. On this date in 1497, monk Pedro de Panpata led what is considered the most violent of the campaigns of the Spanish Inquisition, utilizing such various forms of torture as el cinturón do Dios, the belt of God, la lengua de la verdad, the tongue of truth, and the dread aguja de la fe, the spire of faith. It is estimated that 3,000 to 5,000 souls met their Maker in that year. Today, the Night of 1,000 Tears, or Noche de Mil Lágrimas, is remembered in Spain by painting the doors of Catholic churches blue and partaking in feasts of bread and duck after sundown. July 27, Bernard de Wyethscope's birthday, sometime in the 1800s CE. A most splendid day, this day the birth of our founder Bernard de Wyethscope. His actual year of birth has been lost to time, and there is no record of his passing, but we do know July 27 was the Julian calendar day of his birth. To honor this man's breech birth into our world, it is recommended that folk gather in covens of 13, light candles black as pitch, and take blood oaths of fealty to the crab and the mantis. After that, cake, an orgy, or both are appropriate. August 8th through 18th, the doldrums of summer. It is said in the book of Glorgun that the summer days at this point are the most unbearable and unpleasant to good menfolk and womenfolk. As a means of escape for adherents of the rare and secret society, cult, religion, it is advised that caves be dug out and congregants hibernate inside for a period of 10 days. After the 10th day they shall emerge and break their fast with fowl of a mottled color and a goat that winks while defecating. And now newsworthy items, bulletins of interest from around the region. Abandoned turnip fields a mystery. The fields outside of Jolder have for the 4th consecutive year sprouted a crop of green-purple turnips. They are tough and smell a little of fungus, but are otherwise all right to consume, say food scientists from nearby Catspaw Community University. There is no farm homestead, and no one has been observed tilling, planting, fertilizing, or harvesting the odd vegetables since they first took root 4 years ago. Tammy Farrow of Hubert Lane reports that they make an excellent stew. Dance turns deadly, several hospitalized. A dance held at the Moore Top Veterans Home went from delightful to deadly on Saturday evening, with 3 dead and 12 hospitalized. The home enlisted the services of Reginald Harvey to DJ the event, which started with a collection of standards from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, but took a turn when Reginald spun The Last Time by an unknown singer. At this point, everyone in the crowd began shimmying and shaking, falling and cracking their bones. One dancer was seen stripping her clothes off and crying tears of blood. Mr. Harvey absconded from the scene, taking his equipment and all of the Jell-O from the community refrigerator. Authorities are seeking any and all information about the current whereabouts of Mr. Harvey. And now impress your friends with these nuggets of knowledge. The koala bear has the strength to crush a human hand into a bloody pulp. There is a conflagration in Lower Ohio which has been burning since before records were kept in the region.
I am reading this over your shoulder right now.
A bill was passed in Louisiana in 1904 prohibiting the crossbreeding of centipedes and crickets, spurring the still lucrative black market of cricketpedes. And now, wisdom, advice, and prognostications. Sound words to live by. Hemorrhoids are no laughing matter, except when they're the size of a grapefruit. Then those things are hilarious. That feeling like something is crawling under your leg is not your imagination. It will reveal itself to you soon. Opium white, addict's delight. Opium yellow, you'll be a dead fellow. And now I bid you a restless night. May you cower in the corner until morning's light. And in the harsh daylight you will see no one really gets out of jail free. Thank you for listening to the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour was written, produced, edited, and uploaded by Matt Henshaw, except as indicated.